welcome back again to the Reliably Intermittent Podcast. As always, I'm Aaron Ware. Joining you and joining me is Drew Esposito. Drew, how we doing?
Hanging in there. Got a good one for you today, though. I'm going to bring the energy full 100%.
Yeah, I thought we started off with some of just trying to get the ball rolling, get the flow flowing. And then we thought, with this one, let's bring the fire.
Yeah.
Kind of literally. So we didn't want to be accused of avoiding the news of the year so far. But we also don't want to wade into waters that are outside of our scope. So let's talk about January 6th, but in the context of people. Let's just hit it.
Yeah.
Where do we want to go with it, Mr. Esposito?
I think you got to just smash it head on, right? Right.
Pun intended.
Can we fire them?
Yeah.
Right. You find out your employee was sitting in Vice President Mike Pence's chair and took a selfie, and was posting it on Facebook, and you see it blown up for the longest 24-hour news cycle of your life. The internet does what the internet does.
Yeah.
They track them down, right? It's all, you go on Instagram, and there's an Instagram account dedicated to ferreting out people for various things. They did it with the Charlottesville protests and things like that. They find out where they work.
Yeah,
they
you
tag
go on Twitter,
you, and then they start talking to your business. Yelp, Facebook, Google reviews, phone calls. What the heck can you do?
Sure.
I think that's where it's at. Man.
Yep. It's this is one of those unique things for the operation that we have, where we've got the public sector employers that we work with. We've got the private sector employers that we work with. And it's that juicy gray area of, well, it depends.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a mix. I think there's probably maybe four different ways to analyze. So first is the type of employer. Are you private or public? That's going to be incredibly important. And then second is it a union employee or non-union? And it could be a union employee in the public sector or a union employee in the private sector. Mm-hmm. So are they public sector, non-union? Are they public sector union? Are they private sector non-union? Are they private sector union? Right. So 4 different levels of analysis, because you've got First Amendment, which is all over the page, right? First Amendment for political speech and things like that, and that's all in the news. What it's Twitter censoring you. Yeah.
We can keep this one focused pretty easy on what we know to be factual. Mm-hmm. And that's if you're a private employer, you cannot violate your employees' First Amendment rights.
Bingo.
Easy enough?
Easy enough. Your only concern in the private sector, I shouldn't say your only, when doing these analysis, if you're a private sector with a union, there's potential that the off-duty conduct is somehow protected concerted activity under the NLRB, right? Under the National Labor Relations Act, I should say NLRA, as defined by the NLRB with their decisions and advice decisions, which, by the way, can change now that we have a new administration. I will say, new administration probably isn't going to be issuing any advisory opinions that protects the activity of people that went into the Capitol. I could see the distinction between people who were down the road versus the people who actually went into the Capitol. There is a distinction.
And the interesting thing here in terms of what's protected concerted activity also comes back to your workplace. Mm-hmm. The general, I have a right as a citizen to do what I do. you still got to connect the dots to, or from that to protected concerted activity in the private sector. So
Yeah. And the
you're
NLRA has a section that protects political advocacy, right? They're allowed to, but the key to that is it must be non-disruptive,
Mhm.
and that's where public sector and private sector, the non-disruptive part, I think trends across both areas. In my view, it's really they're saying, is there a nexus to the job, and has it created basically a problem? If it creates a problem, there is a nexus. So in the public sector, a lot of times we ask if there's a nexus. In the private sector, is it disruptive? I
Mhm.
see them as really similar analysis. So
Variations on a common theme. You just in the public sector, and we can put a pin in that for now. You've just got other concerns too.
yeah,
But
but
back
so
to the
I think
private
you hit that.
sector.
Yeah,
Yeah.
private sector, you got used my initial hypothetical. You're I think the guy with the horns, the bull horns, and the bearskin rug. I think Jack Angley or something.
Yeah.
Uh, I start getting calls about Jack. I'm his boss, or I own, ABC stock and supply, and Jack works for me. You have now created a disruption in my workforce, right? If I can't operate my Facebook page, if I can't operate uh, my online shop because I'm getting false orders and fake spoofed emails and this and that, if I have to shut down my phone, you are fired,
Sure.
right? And it probably doesn't have to be that
Yeah.
extreme.
Yeah.
So,
What about the general? I don't want to be associated with that as a
yeah,
business owner.
yeah, I think that comes into play because for me, a disruption as a business owner would really, I mean, I guess I'm going to take an aggressive stance, and I'd probably advise my clients a little bit differently. I'll just speak personally. If I own a business, if
Well, you're
I
a
have
shareholder in our business.
sure, if I have to respond to like one news article, or a reporter calls my phone asking about one of my employees, you disrupted my day, right? Like, I shouldn't be answering questions from reporters about my employees' personal lives,
Mhm.
period. Right? All you are is my employee, and your behavior outside of work should be reflecting positively on me, or at least not negatively.
Sure.
And that's the phrase that's used a lot in the public sector, which is like bringing a negative light to the employer.
Mhm.
Um, and we started with the riots, and it's politically charged. I had a case specifically about this in the public sector with the police chief that we had terminated, and there were hundreds and hundreds of articles that were written about uh, him and the police department negatively, right? Like the department is run like the mafia, all the way out to London. It was like, that was exhibit 100 of my cases. We couldn't get insured, right? We had to go to like some secondary black market insurance pool because no major insurance pool would cover the police department, and so it was astronomical. So we had disruption in the agency. We had negative light. We had council members having to fiend off the public. We had to hire a PR firm, you know, to say this doesn't reflect us, yada yada yada, little Seinfeld-esque. And so we had all of that going on, and that's why people look at this riot and they see it as like patriot versus non-patriot. It could be any action. It could be any action. And if you are doing this, you as an employer, private sector employer, can take action and should.
Again, let me say this again. You as a private sector employer cannot violate an employee's First Amendment rights.
Yep.
That of this discussion is about the brightest line we can draw. Has been
Yeah.
the case for it requires government action. Read your First Amendment. Um, and we're not even venturing into the Twitter sphere and the
Mhm.
tech issue. This is just in terms of your employer A, widget company A with employee B, and you as a private employer contrary to what some of the jailhouse Twitter lawyers of the world want you to believe, you don't violate your employees' First Amendment rights as a private employer.
Yeah, 100%. Now,
There are other, again, all the other issues aside, that is the simple part.
yeah. Now, if you are an employer faced with this issue, it could be anything, right? Sharing inappropriate memes on Facebook or Twitter, anything could bring you into the limelight as an employer for bad behavior, right? We talk about that employees behaving badly with the employees that had the death pool about COVID, so
Right.
you can do lots of things that bring you into a negative light. I would say one thing employers do need to do, I shouldn't say need, they just should do, tell the employee why you are firing them, right? Like, why are we so worried about it? Like, the only way to fix this behavior is if people know that they're being held accountable for this. And I think a lot of people that probably went down to the Capitol, right, had no idea of the repercussions, because a lot of discipline and stuff like that, that's hush hush, or employers, since we have at-will employees, we don't really want to give a reason, right? If you don't want to keep doing it, we got to start giving a reason. So word spreads that employers in the United States, or employers in your state, or you as an employer, are not going to tolerate employees who go out there and run amok for whatever reason, right? And that's I'm being very clear about that. It is the equivalent of a Black Lives Matter protest movement, and you decide to go down and break into a private business and decide to start a fire, right? Or if you want to go down to DC on January 6th and then take it that next step and go into the Capitol, right? It doesn't matter. These are equally offensive, right? You can't riot. There is a difference between protesting and rioting. So,
well, and fundamentally, again, this is the risk assessment. This is the risk analysis you have to make as a private business, what you want to stake out.
Yeah.
And what you want to defend, and what position you want to take within your business.
Mm-hmm.
What culture do you want to create? What culture do you want to defend? What actions are you willing to take to support the workforce culture, workforce development, all that sort of a thing of your business?
And if
you're allowed to do that.
I also think, like, when I say state the reason too, I think a lot of businesses don't want to state a reason because they're worried about taking a side and that affecting the bottom dollar. I think right now, unfortunately, right, if you try to ride the middle, then you're just going to lose both sides of your business, right? Like, oh, you didn't support the Patriots, so you're losing my business. And you didn't advocate hard enough against the Patriots, so you're losing my business. So, like, you're going to have to pick a side. So if you decide to fire someone, you're not saying I support or deny, you're just giving the reason. This is the reason why. I had to answer 50 phone calls.
Yep.
That's not that for a good legal term. That's not cool, right? That's not cool, man. Like, come on, be realistic.
So why don't we touch a little bit on the public sector?
Public sector, a little bit different, certainly.
A little tighter analysis.
A little tighter analysis, because any firing or any discipline by the public sector for something that could be seen as your right to speech or any of your constitutional rights, right? Freedom of assembly, things like that. So there could be lots of implications here. You are the government, and then you are doing discipline, and they're going to allege I'm exercising a constitutional right, and that's protected. Okay. However, okay, they have to meet a lot of burdens, to actually pass that test. So things like, are you speaking as a private citizen on a matter of public concern? And then do your interests outweigh the interests of your employers? That's kind of the test the Supreme Court lays out when you're dealing with this. And regardless, a lot of times the speech won't be protected anyway, especially if you're breaking the law, right? So if you're storming the Capitol I don't know how that's speech. You're just breaking the law. And there may be other avenues for your employer to take. Have they committed a felony?
Right. In Ohio, you've got that other added component of felony conviction precluding you from civil service employment, things like that. Not being an expert on the other 49 states,
Yeah.
local or state laws, just using Ohio as an example, there are other concerns that come into it outside the basic speech component. If somebody's charged and convicted with a felony, that solves it for you. But yeah, it's that analysis framework of essentially does the government's right to suppress, is the government's interest in suppression of a given alleged suppression of speech outweigh the interest of the person making the speech?
Yep. And usually you don't get to that portion of the test. Don't get me wrong. I think a lot of these are going to be, it's not even speech. It's a lot of times it's just off-duty conduct, right?
Mm-hmm.
So did your off-duty conduct violate a workplace rule, right? Do we have workplace rules about bringing the employer in a negative light? Do we have workplace rules about professionalism? Are you a safety services employee in police and fire that you're always on duty, even when you're off duty? And then you're held to a higher standard. You have to arrest people and prosecute the law, and here you are breaking the law, right? So I don't think in the public sector, whether you went to a Black Lives Matter protest and decided to take it too far, or whether you were there on January 6th and took it too far, I think you're dealing with a different issue than speech. I think your conduct is going to violate work rules and codes of conduct.
Just from trawling the internet in the last 3-4 weeks, there have been a non-zero number of law enforcement professionals found to have been inside the Capitol, and firefighters inside the Capitol, some from the state of Ohio. Mm-hmm. I think what will be interesting, again, in the nerdiest possible way as labor consultants, we'll be seeing how, if those individuals have been terminated, how their arbitrations go.
Yes.
Forecasting what an arbitrator will do in a given circumstance is a fool's errand if ever there was one. But I'll be curious to see what these unelected, untethered arbitrators have to say on some of these issues based off the way they've approached other issues in the past.
Yeah, and at least like Ohio system too, I could see our clients, if they've taken action as a result, specifically as a result of stuff that happened on January 6th, if they happen to have an employee and it goes to an arbitrator and an arbitrator decides to, split the baby or whatever, I could see our clients taking it to court, right? Mm-hmm. And saying, this is a matter of public policy, like, Mr. Arbitrator, you're telling us, because the argument employers are going to make is if someone commits an act of sedition, right, the employer is going to use the strongest term, whether it is or isn't sedition. That's not for me. That's for the U.S. prosecutors to determine. But that means I have to employ them in the government. That seems like a public policy issue, right? I have to willfully employ someone who is actively trying to thwart or overthrow I don't even want to say disputed because I don't want to flow into QAnon stuff, an undisputed valid election. It was tried in court, and as far as I know, they failed to prove any irregularities. So as a matter of public policy, that's a tough one if an arbitrator puts them back. But overturning arbitration in Ohio is a mountainous burden to try to do. So
sure. So I think, obviously bringing the fire on the topic, it's just an example of things we've talked about before in terms of regulating off-duty conduct, right? At the risk of just rambling at this point, I think the thing again to come back to is what you hit on first thing in this. What kind of employer are you? What kind of employee are you dealing with? Once you identify those two things, that's going to dictate how you look into these. As always, like we talked about on any number of these podcasts, then you go back to your rules. What are people on notice of? How do you handle it within those constructs? Is the conduct so severe that any person would have known, hey, I can't do that and keep my job? Are you at will? All of those things that go into these analyses, you need to be on alert for. If for whatever reason, I will say this, you happen to be an employer within earshot or view of this podcast, and you have since learned that one of your employees was in the Capitol on January 6th, call your lawyer, call your HR consultants, get help, because I promise you, if you just kind of go off on these things half-cocked, you're going to be in trouble. I'm not saying you would have done anything wrong, but you're going to be defending it, because I've seen what we see today, Drew, the $10 million suit out in California. The attorney in Texas who was removed from his firm has sued for being removed for being there on January 6th. Again, don't go into this without having a game plan. That's not saying don't address it, don't do anything. Just get your ducks in a row.
Yeah. And I tell you, employment manuals, policy manuals, etc., they are developed as a result of reactionary policies to conduct that you never thought you would need. All right. Now would be a good time as an employer to see, do I have a portion of my handbook, of my guidelines, of my rules? It doesn't have to be specific, but something that will cover this. It covers a broader array of things, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have anything about off-duty conduct? If not, maybe now's the time to get a nice little one paragraph. Hey, when you're off duty, you're still expected to act in a professional manner. And if it ends up coming back to us and embarrasses us, you are subject to our discipline policy.
Well, and it plays in with other things that we've encouraged over time, a social media policy or things like that, if you're going to go out there and identify yourself as an employee of X, Y, and Z employer, be aware of the potential ramifications of that decision, because it all comes back to putting an employer in a negative light, you're making the Twitter army or the Instagram inspectors, you're making their job a lot easier.
Yep.
And I'm not here trying to give people advice on how to avoid getting canceled or whatever. Mm-hmm. But all of your decisions have potential consequences.
100%.
All right. I think that's enough fire for today.
That's a good one. We may end up getting too far down the rabbit hole if we continue.
Yeah, I think we've hit the high points. I think we've inspected what needs inspected. So with that said, Drew, thank you for joining me.
Roger that.
As always, to the listeners and viewers, YouTube, Reliably Intermittent Podcast, bang that like button, subscribe. I don't think we get any kind of cred for unsubscribing, resubscribing on the YouTubes, but on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, like, rate, review, give us 5 stars. Or, just give us some stars. Tell your friends and tell your enemies, tell anybody. As always, thank you sincerely for joining us and participating in our shenanigans here. Drew, thank you for joining me.
Until next time.
Goodbye. We want to thank you again for joining us on the Reliably Intermittent Podcast. Now it's time for a bit of a disclaimer. This podcast and all others on this feed are for informational purposes only and not legal advice. No attorney-client relationship is formed by listening to this podcast or any others on the feed. Should you require or want legal advice, we encourage you to reach out to an attorney or statutory legal counsel, as the case may be. Thanks again for joining us, and we will talk to you next time.